Welcome to NBA Jam Tatman QC on Fire Edition. Boom shakalaka.
Happy little games. Since the dawn of time, legends have been told of sword-wielding barbarians who would rule their land with an iron fist, typically with a fair maiden by their side. Thanks to some fantastical artwork by Frank Frazetta, as well as a certain Austrian appearing on the big screen, the general public would once again get lost in its lore. This particular lore transcended from books to the big screen to finally arcades everywhere, thanks to the rather excellent game from Taito that we are talking about today, which is none other than Rastan. This epic hack and slash would go on to become synonymous with the genre and is fondly remembered by retro gamers to this day. What was the inspiration for this game? What game-breaking bug crippled one of the home versions of this game? What was the major difference between the Japanese and North American release? So grab your sword and get ready to slice and dice, because this is the history of Rastan. In the year of 1986, arcade manufacturer Taito is looking to continue its successful line of arcade hits. The company got its start in the mid-1960s producing electromechanical games, and then finally moving to video arcade games in the early 1970s. The company produced a staggering amount of games, with a number of these going on to become bona fide classics. They produced one of my favorite arcade wrestling games, Mat Mania, Bubble Bobble, Renegade, and Arkanoid, and that was just up until 1986. Designer Yoshinori Kobayashi had been tasked with creating Taito's next arcade hit. Mr. Kobayashi had been fascinated with sword and sorcery dating back to his childhood, but once again, influence came from the West in the form of the action-packed Arnold Schwarzenegger flick, Conan the Barbarian. While Mr. Kobayashi was directly influenced by the movie, he was also fascinated with the numerous covers of Conan the Barbarian by legendary artist Frank Frazetta. Rumor has it that when development was first started, it was intended to be a Conan the Barbarian game. Apparently, the company had tried to acquire the license for Conan, but at the time, all video game rights for the property were held by Datasoft. They had produced a fairly successful game based on everyone's favorite barbarian for numerous PCs back in 1984. It was at this point that Mr. Kobayashi borrowed certain concepts from Conan and implemented it into his brand new game. As a matter of fact, you can still see the influence of Arnie's Conan in the game itself. On a side note, released around the same time as Rastan was Barbarian, the Ultimate Warrior for PCs all across the world. This bloody hack and slash decapitation extravaganza is still considered to be one of the best sword fighting games on the 8-bit market. It's not clear which game came out first, but it's still a classic and deserves a mention. The North American version of Rastan never received a full-size dedicated arcade cabinet. It was released only as a kit or conversion, which allowed arcade operators to convert existing cabinets into brand new ones by adding additional marquees, bezels, joysticks, and PCBs. Rastan, or Rastan Saga, as it was known in certain parts of the world, was released in 1987. As the story goes, at least in the Japanese version, an aging Rastan sits atop his throne, contemplating the nasty life he had led. He used to be a thief and a murderer, but it was necessary to survive in such difficult times. He would like us to gather round and listen to the heartwarming tale of his days as a bloody barbarian. As the game starts up, Rastan is seen walking along, letting us know he obtained the consent of the princess for slaying the dragon for all of the treasures of the empire. It's up to you to take control of your giant sword and slay the dragon, obtaining all the riches for yourself. The entire intro and track scenes were removed from the US version, which turns it into a generic hack and slash. Also in between each round is a short cutscene that further explains the story. In the US version, this was changed to a generic screen that remains the same after each round. That's okay though, because this game had everything else going for it. This game is a 1 or 2 player hack and slash fantasy epic in which you take control of Rastan as you set out across 6 sprawling levels, vanquishing the vast enemies you encounter. From the get-go, this game is pretty difficult, but it's nowhere near as bad as some of the other games of the era, such as Ghosts and Goblins. You control Rastan with a standard 8-way joystick utilizing a couple of different buttons. One is for jumping and the other is your attack. Something of note is the longer you hold the jump button, the higher Rastan will jump. While in midair, you can also attack both upwards and downwards, giving you a slight advantage. Your character also doesn't stop moving when he attacks. There are a vast number of enemies in the game, each with lots of color and nice, crisp details. As I mentioned, the game is set across 6 levels, with each one broken up into 3 distinct areas. The first area sees you take on weaker enemies, giving you a feel for the controls, while the second area involves an indoor section, typically inside of a castle. The third area of each level is the boss fight, which takes place inside of a throne room. The playability is fantastic, with you having nice tight control over your loincloth wearing hero. The graphics themselves look fantastic, with lavish level design, which was unheard of for an arcade title back in 1987. You won't have much time to appreciate these visuals, as you will be attacked by hordes upon hordes of enemies. With a little bit of memorization and fast reflexes, you can get pretty far in the game pretty quick. That's not to say it's a cakewalk though, because the enemies are relentless, especially in the US version. Taito decided to make the game here in the States just a little bit more difficult, so if you find yourself lingering too long on a level, bats will swarm your character and sap your strength as fast as my wife saps my wallet. You have a typical energy bar, which will deplete with the more hits that you take. There are a few power-ups you can achieve along the way, such as a sword that shoots fireballs, an axe which is extremely powerful, and a hammer that has longer range. Enemies will also drop certain items that will increase your life. You can also pick up a shield which reduces damage, a mantle which reduces damage by 1/2, armature which will reduce all enemy damage, and finally medicine, which will give you a much needed health increase. Watch out for the red poison though, as that will reduce your energy. Finally, you can pick up jewels for point bonuses and other odds and ends, such as rings which will speed up your weapon. Although there is no time limit, something those clever programmers have implemented is that the further you get into a stage, the background details will change, such as the sun going down. When this happens, the enemy attacks increase, so beware. There are also lots of pitfalls and hazards to watch out for, including spikes, stalagmites, and other traps. Water and fire will kill you dead instantly. One of my favorite sections of the game would have to be the swinging ropes over the fire, but not so much for Commodore 64 owners everywhere, which I will get to in just a bit. In addition to these nice tight controls and the visceral experience, including smooth parallax scrolling, is the mesmerizing music. Surprisingly, there are only 3 different songs that play, one for the outdoor segments, one for the castles, and one for the boss fights. However, these songs encapsulate what this game is trying to achieve, and it ties everything together in a nice little bow. The main theme has been living rent-free in my head for over 35 years, and anyone who has heard it will know exactly what I mean. Big shout out to the original composers Naoto Yagashita and Masahiko Takaki, who were definitely influenced by Conan the Barbarian, but they did put their own spin on it. The sound effects are really good as well, with grunts and groans littered throughout the game. Rastan does let out a painful cry whenever the game is over. Also, a beating heart is located next to your health bar, which will rapidly increase the lower your life bar drops. When it gets almost empty, a heartbeat sound will accompany the animation, making for an already tense situation even more nerve-wracking. The game is a definite quarter muncher, but you are allowed to continue up until the last level. At that point, if you lose your lives, then it's game over no matter what. The game featured a wide variety of enemies to dispose of, including chimeras, centipedes, giant bats, lizardmen, and skeletons with swords and shields, which is a direct nod to Ray Harryhausen's legendary creatures from the movie Jason and the Argonauts. The levels themselves are not named, so I will just show them off in order. So we have Round 1, Round 2, Round 3, Round 4, Round 5, and the last area, Round 6. The mini-bosses you face are King Grayton, King Slay, Simple Goddies, Lalos, the Hydra, and finally the big boss of the game, the Red Dragon. After defeating the Red Dragon, you are treated to a nice ending sequence while the credits roll. The Japanese version lets you know that after obtaining all the treasures from the princess, you leave the kingdom to find another country for you to conquer and become its king. In the US version, all of this text is missing completely while Rastan stares off into the distance for a few short moments. After this, the game is over. Rastan was very successful when it was released in the arcades and it spawned a number of home conversions. There were actually 2 different albums that featured the Rastan soundtrack released all the way back in 1988. A Rastan pinball table was also developed for the Ad Games Legends pinball machine. As any red-blooded 11-year-old boy will tell you, putting dirty words on the high score table was both a thing of beauty and creativity. However, if you try to put in the initials SEX, the initials are changed to AHA or AHA. The character of Rastan made a couple of cameos over the years. In the first one, he exchanged his sword for some of those good old-fashioned Hulk Hogan vitamins and became a professional wrestler in the arcade game Champion Wrestler by Taito. In the Little Scene arcade game Dino Rex, your character is revealed to be Rastan at the very end of the story. This arcade title was also produced by Taito. Surprisingly, the Sega Master System version even featured a bit of nudity in the Rastan manual. Apparently, Medusa forgot to put on her bra when she left the cave that morning, as she is exposed for all to see. As a matter of fact, all of the quote-unquote female characters are sans proper attire. I, for one, was extremely appalled and quickly made a phone call to my local congressman. In 1989, Taito rushed to market the follow-up to Rastan, which was Rastan Saga 2 in Japan, but it was known as Nastar or Nastar Warrior in Europe and North America. The visuals have been given a shot in the arm, which is apparently what Rastan has had done because his sprite is now huge. Speaking of the sprites, all of them are now large and in charge, and while they do look good with a lot of color, the animation is terrible and the gameplay is quite a bit slower than the previous title. Speaking of the animation, aside from the limited frames given to Rastan, the enemies themselves only have a few frames in total. The gameplay has been upgraded a bit, as you now have the ability to block just by simply standing still. You do have power-ups similar to the previous game, such as a lightning attack, long Wolverine claws, fireballs, and projectiles that rotate around you that damage the enemies. The game consists of 6 rounds with an indoor, outdoor, and boss area in each one. You have your typical pitfalls such as fire and spikes, as well as the obligatory ropes that you can swing on. Whereas the original game featured nice tight controls, this game feels like your character is chugging through mud. To be fair, the music is good, but it doesn't compare to the original arcade's tunes. Despite the not-so-great reception to the second title, Taito decided to try it one more time and return to greatness with Warrior Blade Rastan Saga Episode 3. The game now more closely resembles Golden Axe than the previous 2 titles, and the arcade version is noteworthy for using dual screens. There are now 3 different characters to choose from, this time including Rastan, Dewey, and Sophia, each one with different attributes. The game was only released in Japan, but it was released here in the States as part of the compilation Taito Memories. The game uses a number of cutscenes to deliver the story and also branching paths to increase replayability. Right off the bat, you'll notice that the animation has been vastly improved along with the gameplay speed, which results in a game that's a lot of fun to play. The crisp controls that you found in the first Rastan arcade game makes its return along with a number of other wacky enemies to destroy. This time your character can run as well as smashing on enemies who are already knocked down. Your character can even ride dragons. Similar to Golden Axe, your character can pick up and use magic, which is pretty cool to see. The game also lets you choose which order to tackle the levels, which is a nice change of pace. The graphics are outstanding with some really cool level design, including some basic platforming. The music is also good, so if you've never had a chance to play this title, you should definitely check it out.
Ich lösch dich aus! Ich lösch dich aus! Verdammt!
Follow this path.
For some strange reason, Taito decided to publish the PlayStation 2 title Barbarian in Japan, but decided to change the name to Warrior Blade Rastan vs. Barbarian Saga. This title has no significance whatsoever on the lore of Rastan, aside from his character being in the game. This is a 3D arena fighter, which is extremely lackluster in my opinion. This game was brought to us by the fine folks at Titus Software, who also blessed the world with the game Superman 64. The original arcade game was included on a number of compilations over the years, including Taito Memories, Taito Legends, and Taito Legends Power Up. It was also recently released as part of the arcade archives for the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation. Taito also introduced the Taito Egret 2 Mini, which included 40 classic Taito arcade hits. The game did receive one fairly obvious clone, which was Warrior King, released for the TRS-80. We have swinging ropes, green monsters, and even an actual beating heart for the life bar, just like Rastan. The character is even known as Rastan with two N's. This game isn't bad, but the scrolling is pretty choppy and I couldn't get the audio to work at all. Before we get to the official conversions, I wanted to make note that there is a homebrew version coming out for the Amiga that is being developed by Basement Ape, and it looks fantastic. It uses the Scorpion engine and features slightly updated graphics. This even features the arcade attract screens. There is an alpha version you can download to try it for yourself. Hopefully it gets a full release because what I've played so far is fantastic. A version was in development for the Atari ST, which thankfully was preserved. It is extremely early with no enemies or sound, but it is cool to see what could have been. The game was converted to a number of home systems with the 8-bit computer ports done by Imagine Software. Some of these turned out pretty well, and you will be shocked to learn which ones they were. Let's get this party started with a whimper and check out the Amstrad CPC version. In still shots, the game looks great with nice details and colors, but once it moves, it jukes and jives like me after a few beers. When Rastan is on the screen by himself, the speed isn't bad, but as soon as you add one enemy character, it drops by about 50%. The audio also doesn't do the game any favors either, with no music whatsoever. It does get a few points for following the arcade game's layout, but that's about it, just a few points. The ZX Spectrum version may be a little off-putting at first, but it features some nice, tight controls with fast gameplay. It features large, detailed sprites, and similar to the Amstrad version, is faithful to the arcade game's layout. Everything is in monochrome though, so enemies will sometimes get lost in the background. The game even features parallax scrolling though, and it looks great. However, as far as the audio goes, holy queefaroo, Patman! Even I was repulsed by some of the sounds that were coming out of the speakers. If you decide to play this version, I would suggest muting the audio. There is a 128K version which does feature music while we play, And honestly, it's not as bad as the 48K version, which features that good old nasty, queefy goodness. The MSX2 version was programmed by Taito, which typically means higher quality than everything else. This game was programmed to the computer's strength, meaning the first thing to go would be the scrolling. Rather than have herky-jerky scrolling as found in the Amstrad version, they decided to go with a playstyle that didn't allow the screen to scroll. This works out pretty good for the most part, and it keeps the gameplay fairly fast. The graphics are nicely detailed with lots of colors, including the character of Rastan being a multicolored sprite. All the enemies, though, are single color, but it's really not too noticeable. There are also only a few enemies on screen at once. The level design has also been changed, with some elements missing completely, such as the rope sequence over the flames. There is music while we play, and it sounds pretty good. There is even a little bit of digitized sound effects as well. I was pleasantly surprised with this version. The only home console port that this game received was for the Sega Master System. Despite its slightly smaller sprite size, the game turned out rather well. Similar to the MSX version, the level layout has been redesigned and are shorter, but overall it's pretty faithful to the arcade original. To make it a bit more difficult though, they decided to add more pitfalls and traps than found in the arcade game. The playability is nice and tight, although there is a bit of flickering going on. For some reason, they even added a wall jump for Rastan. The graphics are nicely detailed with lots of color and pretty good sound to boot. This even supports FM sound, which sounds really good. All of the cutscenes found in the arcade game are missing, but otherwise, this turned out to be a really good version. Sticking with the Sega brand, the Game Gear version is up next, and it's pretty much the same as the Master System. When playing on actual hardware, the game looks a bit fuzzy due to the Game Gear's lower resolution. Otherwise, it's the same excellent conversion, only in the palm of your hands. The good old Commodore 64 version is up next, and it didn't turn out very well. First, the positive, which should be obvious to anyone who plays this for any period of time, which would be the fantastic music. Enough can't be said about the awesome soundtrack, and composer Martin Galway deserves all the kudos in the world. As far as the rest of the game goes, everything is a muddy mess with drab and dreary colors and not so great graphics. This was due to the inexperience of the artist working on the game, as this was the first game she had ever worked on. There is a fair amount of detail in the backgrounds, and the scrolling is nice and smooth, but the playability is dreadful with slow character movement. The collision detection is not good, with your sword sometimes going right through the enemy. There was even a bug involving the rope swing that crashed the game, making it impossible to get past unless you were using a cheat or a trained version. It's also extremely difficult. You should at least fire it up for a few minutes just to listen to that awesome soundtrack though. A neat little extra buried inside the cover of the Commodore 64 version is a short comic giving our titular barbaric hero a bit of a backstory. The story doesn't really jive with the official storyline from the game, but considering the USA version doesn't have one at all, I guess it doesn't matter. Still, it's cool to see. My first foray into the world of the internet was through AOL in the mid-90s, where one of my friends sent me a copy of Rastan for the PC. The MS-DOS version was converted by NovaLogic, and I was blown away at how good it was. This is extremely faithful to the arcade game, including the original attract scenes, cutscenes, and endings. The game runs in EGA mode, but it looks fantastic with lots of colors and background details. The scrolling is a little choppy, but it plays really good. The game has support for ad-lib sound, so you don't have to use that nasty squeaky PC speaker. This turned out to be one of the better home conversions of Rastan, but not quite the best. The best home conversion of Rastan is for, surprise surprise, the Apple II GS. Take everything that was great about the MS-DOS version and crank it up just a bit, and what you are left with is a very close replica of the arcade original. Thanks to the improved colors of the GS, everything looks a bit better over the DOS port, and it even has better sound thanks to the advanced audio capabilities of the system. The nice tight controls and fast gameplay are here as well, and you really couldn't ask for a better conversion. And there you have it, everybody, the history of Rastan. This video was originally done by me 5 years ago, which at the time, my research is nowhere near as in-depth as it is now. The original video was only 8 minutes long, and this one clocks in at just over 32. This one features a lot of new info and conversions, plus the original microphone I was using sounded like it was recorded in Oscar's garbage can. This has always been one of my favorite hack and slash games, and it really is the perfect package when it comes to music, graphics, and gameplay. If you've never had the chance to swing a giant sword, all the while wearing a nice, tight loincloth, be sure and give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. Just wanted to give a big shout out to my good friend Dave, who I saw at our local comic book convention over the weekend. He facilitated my meeting the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, which was pretty freaking cool. Thanks again, Dave. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.